The doleful life of a great author. Fyodor Dostoevsky was born November 11, 1821 in Moscow, Russia. His parents, Mikhail and Maria Dostoevsky, had 7 children altogether, Fyodor being the second. Fyodor's father, Mikhail Dostoevsky, was employed by Marinsky Hospital for the Poor, and the Dostoevskys lived in an apartment on the hospital's property. Fyodor's father forbade him from talking with the patients of the hospital, as he saw them as miserable profligates. But Dostoevsky often spoke with the patients of the hospital. Anyway, besides the hospital for the poor, Dostoevsky lived amid an orphanage, an insane asylum, and a cemetery for criminals. This exposure to those who Russia chose to disregard and abandon had profound effects on him which would become evident in his later life and even in many of his later works of literature. Also, Dostoevsky was greatly affected by his father, who was a devout Christian. At age 9, Dostoevsky experienced his first epileptic seizure, and at age 16 he and his brothers were enrolled in a military academy in St. Petersburg, shortly following the death of his mother who died from tuberculosis. During this time in the military academy, he studied authors such as Shakespeare, Hoffman, Hugo, and Schiller, whose quotes and poem excerpts repeatedly show up in the Brothers Karamazov, despite the fact that Dostoevsky often ridiculed Schiller. 2 years after his enrolling in the military academy, his father died, supposedly murdered by his own serfs who held him down while they poured vodka down his throat, eventually drowning him. This tragic event influenced Dostoevsky hugely, and is believed to be the basis for his character, Fyodor Karamazov, who he will be introduced to shortly. He became a military engineer for 2 years, but eventually resigned to become a full-time writer. His first novel, Poor Folk, was immensely successful and thrust him to literary fame. However, one of his next novels, The Double, wasn't received as well by the public and damaged his reputation as a writer and author. Dostoevsky was arrested for his participation in the Petrushevsky Circle, a radical political organization which Tsar Nicholas I thought would undermine his autocracy, so he ordered the execution of all of its members, including Dostoevsky. However, as he and the other members of the Petrushevsky Circle were lined up before the firing squads, the guards received word that the Tsar had condemned their sentences. This near execution greatly influenced him and many of his later works thereafter. Dostoevsky was exiled to Siberia, where he would endure 4 years of hard labor, followed by more than 5 years in the Russian army. His more than 10 years served in Siberia completely altered his views. He regressed from his previous radicalist and socialist ideals and became devoutly religious. Also, during his time spent in exile, he met and married his first wife, Maria. After being promoted to second lieutenant, he was allowed to leave Siberia and return to St. Petersburg. Upon returning to St. Petersburg, he and his brother Mikhail started a few literary journals in which he published a number of works and articles, including House of the Dead and Notes from Underground. The next several years of his life were marked by the death of his wife and his brother. He fell into a deep depression and began taking trips around Europe, where he began to compulsively gamble, causing him to fall into debt. He also began to suffer from bouts of epilepsy. During this declination of his life, he began writing, appropriately, The Gambler. He met a stenographer named Anna, to whom he fell deeply in love and were married 2 years later. During the next 15 or so years, he would publish his greatest works, Crime and Punishment, The Idiot, The Possessed, and what is considered his masterpiece, The Brothers Karamazov. Fyodor Mikhailovich Karamazov died on January 28, 1881 in St. Petersburg at the age of 59.